welcome to the podcast. This is Anatole Stroke, and you are listening to the flagship episode of Stabchats. What we're about is trying to simulate something that was very imperative and integral to my own fighting development, and that was getting around other like-minded individuals who shared a common passion for stick fighting or boffer combat and just shooting the shit and picking each other's brains. And it's my hope that with this podcast, somebody out there that maybe doesn't have that wider audience available will be interested or inspired to try something new or gain some new insight or just want to train more. It's all about making better fighters. We're not sure if this is going to be a regular thing. It may be only an event thing, or if this is it, well, it is what it is. There are some preliminary ideas floating around for a Sword Night Boot Camp podcast, but nothing set in stone. We are going to be theoretically hosted on warlordsports.com, which is a great website, provides a great service to the Amtgard community. And the format will be, I'll find interesting people who have some kind of hold in this game or are just fighters or whatever, and hopefully they'll want to talk to me. And I'll have some very, very basic pointed questions, but other than that, just trying to capture the organic dialogue that happens. So tonight, we're missing one of our guests. We're down one so far. He might come a little bit later. I think he was eating some food, but to start out, we have Sir Ilmryn Stroke, Warlord Sword Knight out of Las Cruces, Dragonspine, and Sir Brennon Viridian, Warlord Sword Knight out of Emerald Hills, right? Or just in general Texas.
Yeah, Texas.
Yeah, Tejas, for those that don't speak Spanglish. Okay, so one of the things, guys, that I was kind of like wondering how we were going to get this started is like the first question. And what I decided on is actually kind of selfish. I just want to hear what you guys have been working on lately. Like in your own fighting, in your own training. Have you had any epiphanies lately? Are you currently trying to like tackle a certain obstacle that's in your development? Or have you just been like kind of autopiloting?
Something I've actually been working on lately is when I first started playing, well, and actually up until about the last 5 to 7 years, it seems like a long time, but it's not, everyone was always very aggressive. Like they'd step in and they'd swing on you, et cetera, et cetera. And now the high-end fighters have migrated towards being a lot more patient, which is great. I mean, I think it's the superior style as opposed to just throwing and hoping for the best. But, of course, I want to be the patient one, and I want to riposte on them. So what I've been specifically working on is trying to get high-end fighters to open up on me or to develop some really safe openers that work on high-end fighters. It's like, everyone else is not a big deal. You can make them throw on you just by stepping in or pump faking like the block or something like that. But high-end fighters specifically, and, I've been working on it. I was working on it today with Cade, trying to throw to his hand or trying to step in certain ways to get him to open up on me, and I had some success with that, and I was working on it with you some last night, and eventually you rotated your hand back instead of, like, you put, like, your empty hand towards me rather than be in a position where you could throw on me and get riposted on.
Well, right. One thing that I noted last night, which we're recording at Maze, by the way, for those that don't know, is in that ditch we had last night, you kept doing the wide circle to snag my sword arm. And I was having a really hard time getting that outward block towards you. And eventually I just said, kind of, fuck it. I'm not going to keep my lead hand out and maybe utilize my footwork a little bit more.
Yeah.
So when you're using those openers, is there something that you've been finding a little bit more tried and true?
Unfortunately, no, actually, which is the problem, right? So I'm sure that there's something out there that I can figure out, but when you're talking about high-end fighters, one of the hallmarks is that people are adaptive, right? Like, one of the big things about high-end fighters is that they can analyze what's going on, and they all have a unique style to start with, and then they can adapt it. So you might get something that catches them once or twice, and then it changes. So it's really frustrating. I mean, it's frustrating in a good way,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because it's like it's constantly changing. But there is no, oh yeah, I step in, I throw to their hand, you know, I drop my guard,
There's
I
no
wait for them to high
formula.
cross, because that's something that you can do to, you know, 95% of the fighters, and you step in, shot to the hand, drop the guard, come back, block the high cross, chop the arm, and it works, right? But you know, like when I was fighting Cade, for an example, because it was what I was doing most recently today. What actually worked is to step into his right, square my torso, and he'd always stab. Or at least some of the time, he would stab. And then I could push his stab out with my sword, come back onto his arm, or I could catch it with my offhand and chop him down. And, you know, it took me like 30 minutes to figure that out. And it's just random, right? Like that just happens to look like something that he sees that works for him. And then I gotta figure that out for everyone else. So,
Right.
it's kind of a slow process.
What about you, Kyle?
Actually, recently that's also one of the things I've been working on. Not to sound like I'm repeating something, but on top of that note, I'm also trying to learn how to close on a bunch of people since I'm shorter.
Short test.
What's that?
Short test.
Yeah.
Short test.
Short is, yeah. Some things that have helped me is learning the person I'm fighting, learning their style, and making them repeat the same process over and over again so that I can take advantage of what they're doing. One thing that I do that helps me with that is learning how to use my shortness, my body baits, to make people close, or if I want to close on them, giving them an obvious advantage, either displaying something that I want them to go after, or making them think that they're safe. On high-end fighters, this has been extremely difficult because it's, like Brennon said, it's very adaptive, and they can see what you're doing a lot of the times with very obvious openings or baits. And so it's trying to figure out what makes them want to do what they're doing, what makes them tick, and what makes them want to throw for a specific area, because obvious stuff doesn't really work.
So I've kind of had like I guess a better perspective than most on fighting you, Kyle, since we grew up together. And one thing I noticed that I think was indicative of something B said is you have slowed down a lot in your fighting, and you seem to become a lot more methodical, meticulous, and technical over the years. Do you think that's something that you've actively tried to do, or something that has just kind of like naturally happened the better you've got?
Both. One thing that I did years ago was I realized a lot of my wins was because I was lanky, or because I was short, or it was just a natural advantage, something that I can't keep up 10 years down the line. And so I learned how to, I guess, age myself in my fighting and bring myself back and say, I gotta learn how to fight mechanically to the best I possibly can, because 10 years down the line, maybe I gain weight, you know, eventually your body starts wearing out, and you need to be able to fall back on basic skills or basic knowledge to keep fighting, or you're just going to get crushed later on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also see a lot of people confuse speed with skill, and this is especially prevalent in like the biggest fish syndrome, right? Where you've got one guy who's really good in his, you know, maybe large park, but it's probably an isolated park, or a park where it doesn't get a lot of exposure to wider amp guard. It's like, oh, well, I'm the badass in my group of 50 or 40 or 20 or 15 or whatever.
Right.
And a lot of the time it's just because he happens to be the fastest guy, right? And being fast is definitely an advantage if you're talking about everyone else not being good. But when someone actually gets good technically, being fast is only an advantage if you're also at least as good technically as they are.
Right.
You know, so it's a small edge. It's no longer the primary edge.
For sure. We were just joined by Warlord Eggman out of the Iron Mountains, Denver, right?
Yes.
And so what we're talking about right now is, and we just started. So what specifically? I mean, if you can put it into words, have you been working on lately? Have you had any epiphanies in your own training and fighting? Anything? Because it always seems like people that really get dedicated to stick fighting or whatever, even if they take longer breaks, you're always mentally thinking about it, right? And you're always kind of like, well, what about this? And tossing ideas around in your own brain. So, is there anything you've been working on?
The only thing I've been really working on lately is coordination with my left hand because my right shoulder's been injured. I've been working on drills to increase my speed and, as I said, coordination, but I've been working very heavily on my blocking game for the past 6 months or so because I know I just heard Brennon talking about the use of speed as something I heavily weighed on whenever I first started Amp Guard. But I feel like I'm not as fast as my left hand, so I really need to increase my defense. Otherwise, I'm not going to win any fights.
Yeah.
Simo, if anything.
Right. And you mentioned something just now, drills. So that's something that, when I moved from Dragonspine proper up to Santa Fe, and I was amongst a park that I didn't have a large group of competition on a regular basis, multiple times a week that I could fight with, I had to, in order to keep improving, be a lot more meticulous in that way, and really start delving into drills. And I guess that can kind of bring us into another one of the questions I had is, what are your training schedules like? Do you just go out and fight a bunch, or do you actively drill and try and break things down? And I know it's going to be different probably for everybody, but let's start with you, Clint.
Early on in my early on in my Amp Guard career, I had a knight at the time who had a lot of free time, as well as I did, and I find myself going over pretty much every day, and we'd spar for a few hours every night at least. I felt like that was the only training or any kind of teaching I ever got was just sparring. After being injured with my right arm, the only thing I've been trying to do is not hit people in the head with my left arm.
It's kind of working.
It's kind of working.
Admirable.
But, so the only drills I do are more recently, and that's just so that I can have more endurance and coordination with my left arm right now. And,
What about you, B?
I used to do a lot of drills, and I've gotten to the point where I'm pretty well practiced at seeing something and picking it up and learning it pretty quickly. So I don't just spend a lot of time ingraining something into muscle memory anymore. Because now most of the stuff I do is not, oh, it's a new shot. It's, oh, well, it's a combination of existing muscle movements I already know.
For sure.
So it's more mental than it is anything else. So I don't do a whole lot of drills anymore. But I'm fighting 3 to 4 times a week right now. And 2 of those are during the week, and they're just 90 minutes sparring with one person, and it's pretty high-end people. And it's just breaking stuff down analytically. All right, well, did that work? What worked about that? And then going back and forth. And then it's, 3 or 4 hours, 2 days a week on Saturday and Sunday at the park. And that's hit or miss in terms of value, but, keeps the reflexes sharp.
For sure. What about you, Kyle?
I tend to, the way that I like to run drills, I guess, is I like to do them while I'm actually fighting. I like to try to make someone mimic something I want them to do and try it over and over again. This helps create resistance in them actually wanting to do it. So if I can make someone do something 3 times in a row, not only do I get that practice, but then I get to practice whatever my goal was. Right now I'm only fighting maybe twice a week. Fighter practice for 2 to 3 hours, and then being at the park for 2 to 3 hours. But like I said, it's good quality fighting. Eric, Charles, those guys, Mark, and training at home is stuff I do as think about what I want to practice that next week or the next time I pick up a sword. And I go through it, and I go through the people I'll be fighting, and I will go through each fight over and over again and try to mimic what's going to go on and try to build tons of scenarios around it so that when I see it, it's good to go, it's done. The muscle memory does have to be worked on a little bit, and that's just part of fighting.
And it sounds like you're saying you really try to engage the mental side of your training quite a bit.
Yeah, I've really relied on analytical fighting more than tons of practice, because I think once I've thought about it enough, I can execute it many times, depending on the caliber of the fighter. If I haven't fought someone that much, sometimes it takes 50 losses, sometimes it just takes 5, depending on how good they are.
Right on. So this next question, I know Brennan and I beforehand kind of debated on, but we were talking about like a top 10 list, and it seems like it can be used for good or evil, right? I mean, it might allow somebody to go out and really kind of get names out there and find somebody who to, know who to go and fight and seek out for advice. But more than that, when I was thinking about that after our discussion, I started thinking about, well, what about that ultimate badass? That the greatest fighter in Amtgard, or the greatest fighter ever, or throughout all LARPdom, or whatever you want to call it. Like, is there a number one? Do you feel like that's attainable? Do you feel like that's something that, with enough practice and training, you can reach, or is there always going to be like that number one's nemesis? What do you think about that, Clint?
I think when you start talking about legends of LARPdom and stuff like that, it's
Really gay.
Yeah.
Really gay.
Makes
It
me
just
feel
makes
bad
it
that
gayer
I'm
when you
here.
say that, right? Legends of LARPdom.
Can we strike my name from this? No, I'm just kidding.
Sorry, bud.
It's that tried true thing that people talk about in sports. It's like, is anybody ever better than Muhammad Ali or something like that? His name is just at the top, like Michael Jordan, stuff like that. These are people who innovated this sport. They're not necessarily the best now, or would have been the best now. They're the ones who changed it. So, I'm not sure. The top two I always hear is Leroy and Spin, and they weren't exactly the same time. So I hear Spin being number one a lot of times, and I hear Leroy being number one still a lot of the times, even though they've both retired and they're both playing SCA now. So, is there like an attainability there? You'll be fighting somebody's legend, not actually who they are now. So, I would like to think that it could be attained.
Yeah. And do you think that's kind of ultimately every fighter who really gets passionate in the game? Do you think that, at least subconsciously, if nothing else, that's their ultimate goal, to achieve that level?
Well, of course, everybody who's competitive want to be the best. I know before I took my break, like in 05, that I was kind of upset that, well, not upset, but I guess I felt like I didn't get as much recognition as I thought I should have had. And I don't feel...
minority.
Yes, it is because I'm a minority.
For those that don't know, I feel I should point this out. Clint is,
Goog.
well, he's the only Asian warlord ever in the Legends of LARPdom. I just want to say that now. The Legends of LARPdom.
And my kung fu is strong. No, but...
We don't hold that against
him.
him.
What was I talking about for this whole thing?
Right.
Yeah, I don't remember where I was going with that.
Talk about not getting enough cred before you took your break.
Oh yeah, it's because I have a bad memory apparently.
Right.
No, but everybody wants to be like on a top 10 list of some sort, and I felt like I wasn't on very many people's top 10 list. So everybody wants to be the best. I'm just not sure if anybody can stick their peek their head out higher than the rest of the crowd, so that everybody's saying he's constantly the number one. I feel like Spin was the last person to do it. Maybe Brennon here, but it's obtainable. I hope.
Okay. You guys want to chime in on this?
Please.
Kyle, why don't you go ahead?
As for like a top 10, I think there's always, those top 10 players, the top 20 players, top 1,000 players, whatever. And I think a lot of the time there's so many variables that factor into who can be top one on a certain day, certain time, everything.
Consistency is true.
I think one of the big points is when you're at the top in this game. What I've noticed is a lot of the super top enders, Leroy, Brennon, Spin, it's not like Brennan's going out and completely destroying him 9 fights out of 10. It's always very close, and it's always, the separation isn't gigantic. It's always 10, 20, maybe 20% at the best time. but for a number one, it might be kind of cool to have a number one, but the number two isn't too far behind.
And I mean, I think it's definitely kind of interesting right now in that we have somebody on the podcast that's often ranked the number one right now. And that's, of course, UB.
Oh shit! I didn't know.
Shit. Bullshit, whatever.
He got the memos.
So, do you feel like there is a number one badass, or do you think that is something that is obtainable?
I don't know. I don't really look at it that way anymore. I guess I used to at one point when there were people that were definitively much better than me, and I could point to and be like, oh well, if I could just be as good as that guy, I'll be at the top of the heap. And now that I'm kind of,
At the top of the heap.
At the top of the heap, right? Yeah, no, or at least in contention for it. It's very, very different. Because I don't have a lot of milestones or mile markers anymore. It's just, well, can I be better today than I was last week? And that's my goal. So I don't know. Kind of like Kyle alluded to, there's a lot that goes into is someone actually better than someone else, right? Like, one of the things that I really pride myself on is having a breadth of knowledge. Like, there's people that are better than me in a given style. I'm really not very good at Florentine. But I can competitively fight Florentine, and I can competitively fight Board, and I can competitively fight Pole, even though it's fucking awful. And, I fight Sword Madu, and Sword Punch, Sword and Strap Shield, and Single Sword, and Sword Dagger, and all this crap, right? And if there's one thing that I think I'm really strong at, it's doing that. And I think that's one of the things that really sets apart people that are, really fantastic at the sport as a whole, as opposed to being really good at what they do. Because like a lot of people are really fantastic at having one style, and it becomes impossible to compare those people to people who are fighting outside of their style, right? Mm-hmm. Like, if you take Arthon, who's legendarily good at sword and board, right? You can't compare him to Diego, because Diego does sword and board, but really he's actually better at Florentine. So you say, well, Arthon's going to beat Diego in sword and board. Yeah, well, we knew that. Who's the actual better fighter? Okay, if you put Harry with sword and board against Diego with Florentine, who's going to win? Well, it's not consistent, right? So you go, well, who kills more people on the field? All right, well, Harry's going to kill more people on the field because sword and board is better suited towards fighting on a field with lots of people. Mm-hmm. You can do things that are going to catch shots without paying attention. It's got passive defense.
Right.
Whereas Florentine requires a lot of awareness and a lot of hustle to get the same results. So that's not really a great indicator either. So you start breaking it down and going, well, what's best mean? And it becomes kind of complicated. Like if you look at Seth is a fantastic fighter. His specialty is Florentine. He's really good at that. But Seth will be the first to tell you that he's awful at things like board. He doesn't like it. It's not for him. He's a terrible board fighter, right? Harry, better than Seth at board, no question. And they'll both say that. Does that mean that Seth is not as good as Harry? No, I don't think that's accurate, So it becomes really complicated.
Right. It seems like it becomes a little bit more like introspective or situational based on just who you are in general, That's something in my own fighting that I've kind of mentioned and to a few of my friends and realized is like board was really my specialty, and I think it was you, B, that told me, like, you're doing fine, fucking stop. Like, go pick up something else.
Yeah, at some point you get very diminishing returns on, can I get any better at board? Well, you're already near the top of the game. Fucking pick something else up. It'll actually improve your board more than keep fighting board.
Exactly. And I think that it's also indicative of kind of like a fighter's maturation as opposed to like when they fight and it's just about wins. It's just about like, well, I want to go out and get wins. That's what I want. As opposed to, like you were mentioning earlier, what's your milestone? What next hurdle do you need to overcome in order to become a better overall fighter or athlete, if you want to look at it like that. Any more? Do you guys want to say anything else on that? I feel like that was a good point.
I'd just like to throw out that, I think the milestone that a lot of people overlook, and certainly seemed to work for Shion, was Kyle's sister.
All day.
Just throw that out there, then we can move on.
We were not going to get away with this podcast without mentioning that, were we?
That is my next milestone.
That is your next milestone.
You'll
belong to a great and elite brotherhood.
Well, you'll be happy. She's got like the frequent flyer card. I think the next one's free.
Oh, excellent. So it's like a punch card.
Yeah.
Like Subway sandwiches.
Oh.
On the 10th one, you get a free
I
abortion.
wonder if she has a $5 of the month. You know, like. We're also joined in the studio by a bunch of jackasses that laugh at
By studio, we mean
Yeah, we have
Mark's
a
house.
living room.
Yeah,
We have a live
Mark's
studio
house.
audience.
We got
Hey,
Greg's.
hey, fuck you, buddy. This is a classy living room.
You're right.
Thank you.
In the ghetto.
Belful.
The
We have
kitchen.
Relcore up in the house. How the guys are? How the fuck are you guys?
I'm a little horny.
Doing all right. I'm not nearly
I
drunk
almost
enough
asked
for
you
this.
how guys do you fuck,
Well,
which
I
is
don't
actually
fuck
my next
guys.
question.
I've actually picked up a lot from Brennon on this one when it comes to fucking guys. His rules are often and quickly with a mask on.
And chocolate cups.
Yeah, he's kind of like a all-in kind of guy.
Yeah. He's
Fast and hard,
Yeah.
almost mechanical in a way, right?
He's like the pile driver of guy fucking in F-Guard. I'd say he's actually number one on my list of guy fuckers.
Yeah.
I would never fuck guy. You
Yeah, are you specifically talking about Matt? Or
I am not talking about
I
Matt.
couldn't get a cock in edgewise.
Right. Matt has a lot of things already filling up his ass.
go on? All right, back on track. This one, of course, is another big kind of general one. I feel like just because this is the premiere episode of Stabchats, I need to ask this. What would you guys give to an up-and-coming fighter as the most integral piece of advice, for training or doing whatever, trying to get better and achieve a level of proficiency in the sport that is admirable?
And before we begin, I'd just like to say we're all going to say practice at some point, so we'll get that out of the way.
Yeah, I know, it's like a really vague
Yeah.
general question, right? But I felt like when I was making the list of what I should ask, I felt like this one was inevitably going to come up sooner or later, so might as well just get it out of the way. And that's not to demean the question at all, but fuck that question, because it's very obvious, but everybody comes at this, and it's one of the things I've come to love about the game, with their own perspective and their unique experience. So sometimes you never know, you might get something other than, well, fucking practice more or whatever. Clint, what do you think?
Practice.
Okay.
Good job.
Moving on. No.
I think a lot of it can be a lot of mental, too. Like, somebody was asking Bruce Lee once, like, how do I punch faster? He's like, well, you punch faster. It's sort of, some people are okay with being as good as they are, and some people don't push themselves, and that's the mental aspect of it, is that you got to know that even though you might be the best fighter on the field, it's not the best you can be. You got to push yourself mentally or challenge yourself in different ways to get better.
For sure. D, what do you think?
I honestly, one of the best things that I could say for someone who's really aspiring is you need to have really lofty goals, and you need to have really reasonable expectations. You should aim really high, and then when you fail miserably, you need to know that that's okay. Because if you're just starting out, I mean, you've got a minimum of 7 or 8 years of hard slogging before you actually get anywhere near the top, if you can do it at all. And that if you're really serious about it, that needs to be your constant goal. And then you just need to have reasonable expectations that you get better a little bit day at a time. And you need to appreciate that and be able to look back and go, well, here's the milestones that I've hit, and I've made this much progress, and these are the things I'm working on next. Because you can't, no one gets meaningfully better overnight. It doesn't happen. Every once in a while, you'll see someone who has a really good background and a really good knowledge of fighting, and then all of that just sort of comes together, and they make this massive progress over a year, and it looks like they went from 0 to hero in like a year. Well, they didn't. They did a whole bunch of prep work to get there, and then everything sort of came together at the same time. but it doesn't mean they actually got good in a year. I mean, that happened with Brett and Jay Lee, who are two of the most recent up-and-coming guys. They spent 6 or 7 years being mediocre, and then they spent 1 year, well, about 2 years being really solidly practicing and just working their ass off on everything that they already knew and making the small, meaningful adjustments, 3 or 4 times a week to go become really good. But they couldn't have done it without the 6 or 7 years of prep time to get there. It just wouldn't have happened. So, lofty goals, reasonable expectations. And screw it.
Biggest advice to fighters. One of them is, I think, don't worry about getting that win. I think a lot of people associate winning with being the best, and really winning is a side. It comes with being good. I will always say that I will take 100 losses with 1 victory and some knowledge that I gained from that than just straight 100 wins. And small goals, like Brennan said, go to the park, go to your event, whatever, and instead of saying, I'm going to beat everybody on the field, you go back and you say, what did I learn? What am I going to learn? When I was learning how to fight, a lot of it was going to events, hoping Brennan would be there, and I'm not going in saying, all right, I'm going to try to beat Brennan 2 out of 9,000 times, where that's kind of where it's at right now. But it's going and fighting Brennan and then going, okay, what did he do? What can I do better? Talking to him about it, asking questions, picking it apart, and then going home and practicing it. So biggest advice is don't worry about getting that W. You'll eventually get it. It's the win.
Wu-Tang.
Getting the W. Getting the W. Getting the win.
Well, if you get the Wu-Tang, it means you actually don't fight in events, at least not with everyone else.
Oh yeah, that's true.
It's an elite membership only VIP kind of thing.
Isn't Dougie in it?
Yeah, we don't need to talk about that.
I thought more than half of Ambergard was in it.
Yeah, at least in the Iron Mountains.
And that's why Brennan's so pissed off about it, is we
Because
still
the whole
won't let
ditch
him
fighting
in.
walks off.
Yeah. Brennon, so we had a few questions that I put on like the Amtgard Facebook group. And some of them were kind of horrible, so I didn't include those. But I got 3 that I thought were, at least, we could have some interesting discussion about. And we'll try and do these fast. And just, like, we have 3, so I'll ask you each one, if that works.
Sure.
And then we can be out of here. Let me see here. B, I'm going to go ahead and give you the fighting multiple opponents question. How do you do it? What goes through your mind?
So fighting multiple opponents, for me, is trying to avoid it.
Okay, moving on.
No, like, seriously, it's good advice. If you can avoid doing it, you should. Like, a lot of the times...
So how do you create that? I mean, you're like on a ditch field at Clan or whatever, and 3 guys roll up on you. Do you try and create that scenario?
Well,
they
if
roll up on you with their dicks out.
Right,
It's weird.
if you pull your gun...
Okay.
No, but seriously, if you're fighting in an environment where you know your team is outnumbered and they're going to collapse and die, like, a lot of the time I'll intentionally speed up the fight with the first guy so that I can kill him, so I can maybe go take a couple more guys out, so that by the time they actually finish rolling the rest of my team, it's no longer 9-on-1, it's 2 or 3-on-1, or 1-on-1, so I don't get as fucked. A lot of the rest of it is mental in terms of screwing with their mentality, because there's always sort of like a brave guy, a coward, and then everyone else.
Like an archetype for each other. Oh, wow, that's
No.
interesting.
There's the guy who is the most cowardly in the group. There's the guy who is the bravest or dumbest in the group, and then there's everyone else. Seriously, and this is a good way to look at it. Because what you do is you fake towards the coward. The coward then steps back. Then you drop your guard towards the brave guy, who then comes forward. And then you strafe around the brave guy, because the other people are just standing there going, what? And then you kill the brave guy. And now you repeat. So now there's a new brave guy, and then there's the same coward, and then there's one less everyone else.
So you find one guy and you basically make him your bitch by spooking him a bunch.
Yeah, well, actually, you're not spooking him. You're getting him to attack you,
Yeah.
right? To step out and get murdered.
I mean the coward.
No, the
You're
coward.
kinda-
Yeah,
you
he's,
make
he's
him
the
your
wing
bitch.
Because what happens is when you scare that asshole, then everyone else is like, oh, we got to wait for our buddy, except for the brave guy who's going to get killed.
Right on.
And the other thing is, no matter how much people bitch at you for it, you should leg people when you're fighting many on one.
For sure,
You
definitely,
should really
yeah.
fucking leg people, and that's it.
So, Clint, I'm gonna throw this one at you. Oddball weapon combos. How do you deal with them?
What would be an oddball weapon combo? Like
Uh,
nunchucks?
Down spear and sword.
Down screens. I don't know.
Flail and
that's
shield?
seriously though, that's an interesting question
You're
because
talking
like,
about like Wolverine claws or something?
how would you kill Wolverine?
Like going in and building.
But I mean, that's an interesting question because I feel like the longer you spend in this game, the less like
Flailing
weird something becomes, right? Like you more just kind of like adhere to your basics no matter what or what you do. But I don't know. I mean, like, do you ever have your moment where somebody just pulled out something like double flail or like someone put a flail on the end of a pole arm?
Or
and
like
you're
anytime you're fighting monkey.
No, man. Or like after Phantom Menace and everybody had the spear.
Yeah, and, I mean, besides just up and like gacking
That's like 20
somebody,
years ago.
have you ever come into like conflict like that? Like when you're just like, what the fuck is this? Like, how do I even?
Like, if we're talking about fighting people with funny weapons, it's usually a funny weapon because it's not practical, so you gotta find out what's unpractical about it. Like, Wolverine claws are... I don't
Have
know.
you actually fought somebody with Wolverine claws?
Yes.
Dan, right?
Nice.
Oh, Dan had like a weird...
Full one?
Not quite, it was like one claw, but some weird punch weapon.
It was more of a Baraka than a Wolverine.
Or like an Ahab.
Hey, there you go.
So usually there's a reason that it's just an unusual weapon. It's not practical, so you got to find out what the not practicality of it is. Like for flails, for example, the return shots. You know, you're not going to get double tapped with a flail. I hope not. So usually you want to like juke and dodge.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. There's really not any flanking. It's like they bust into the helicopter move, and then you know it's coming from one direction. So
And then you stab it in the eye.
yeah.
Right on.
So you pretty much have to exploit it and find your opening.
Okay. Kyle, distance control and lateral fighting.
As in, what do I do with it? Or
Yeah.
uh,
I mean, I
I move
I
around
know I
them.
led you on because I said that was a question, but I forgot to actually write down the question. So I'm just saying what I remember, and those are words.
Okay.
But you have
Well,
to answer
I'll
in the
try.
form of a question.
Yeah, you have to answer.
What is
Would you like to buy a
strafing?
vowel? What is strafing?
I learned from being a little bit shorter. It was harder to just power through people's stuff. I had to learn how to move around my opponent to get the angles I wanted to. Up until maybe a year or two ago, and definitely at the last SKBC when I talked to Clovis, I really got to see that even if you're short, you can still throw. Just at weird. If you do it correctly, you can do whatever you want, no matter how short you are or how tall your opponent is. But as
It
for,
especially applies to what shots you take.
yeah, bam, roasted.
Love you, Ben.
As for distance control, I've learned to, and I guess lateral movement. You have to pick your openings. If you just run at somebody, straight at them, they may just, especially if it's Brennon, he'll just pick you up and throw you, plant you down and just laugh and then kill you, stab you in the junk a couple times.
Yeah, fuck that guy.
I don't really know what else to add to it.
I think that question ultimately, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, kind of is indicative of somebody saying, how do I utilize my footwork? Because that's what, you know, when I hear distance control and lateral movement, that's what it all boils down to, right?
Yeah.
Is utilization of proper and precise footwork.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The goal is to stay outside of their range, but still be able to hit them.
All right.
I think another way to look at it is you use footwork to exploit their lack of understanding of their own distance control.
Yes.
Like, so,
Definitely.
because most of the time, what you really want to be is in that sweet spot where they think they can hit you and they can't.
Yeah.
So you're really trying to stand in the gray zone where they don't understand their own reach.
Which is where stabs are beautiful.
Mm.
The stabs are very deceptive.
Distance control is different for a lot of people too, because there's tall fighters and then there's short fighters. There's rushers and then there's the backers.
Backpedalers.
Backpedalers, that's what I was looking for, yeah.
Pushers, catchers.
I'm a pretty tall guy, but I fight really low, and it allows me to
Yeah.
snipe people pretty well because they don't know how close I actually am.
Right. Well, I think we're going to close it out at those set of questions. Thank you guys very much for being on the podcast, and hopefully we'll get this going again. And I appreciate the insight. And
I'm getting paid for this, right?
I gotta go. Thank you for listening to the premiere episode of Stabchats. If this happens again, great. But if not, well, see ya.